Hi everyone, welcome to the Cosmic Busker. My name is Bobby Cody. In this video I'm going to put a whole bunch of puzzle pieces together for you that ultimately will result in what I believe is a message to humanity from our ancient past. One that it's critical that we come to grips with, understand, and take action upon if we're going to survive as a species. This should change your entire perspective on reality, on yourselves, your fellow humans, and how we integrate ourselves with reality and how we behave not only individually but collectively as a species as well. I hope you'll sit through this and pay attention and attempt to come to an understanding of what I'm trying to present, because I think it's one of the most important things that we have ever had to come to grips with as a species. Okay, now the first piece to this puzzle is going to be an understanding of sacred geometry. You hear geometry, you may be a little worried. It's going to be very easy, very simple. If you can look at a shape, read a number, it's going to be not much more difficult than that. Sacred geometry has been around for thousands of years, has been encoded in all our sacred architecture, temples, churches, etc. All of our great thinkers have expounded upon sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is important because it's seen as the basis for all reality. It's these basic shapes that with these shapes everything is created, essentially, not including fractal geometry, which is a little bit more complicated, and I won't go into that. Just sacred geometry for now. So in keeping with that, I'm going to use a cartoon called Spirit Science. It's online. I'll provide a link to it below, as I will with all the information that I use in this video. This will give an introduction to sacred geometry, in particular the central figure of sacred geometry, which is known as the flower of life. After the flower of life, we'll go into what are known as the 5 platonic solids, take a quick look at them, know what they are, and their angular angles, to what the angles essentially add up to and why that's important. So first, here's the flower of life, introduction to the flower of life in the form of a cartoon.
But we have to talk about some other things first. Everything in the universe is geometric, whether it's people, trees, cats, planets, solar systems, stars, you name it. Anything in the universe can be measured on a geometric scale. Having said that, it's important to note that creation is also geometric. What we're going to be looking at today is the pattern of creation. Essentially what this means is that everything in the universe comes out of this single pattern. I'm not making this up. This single image will change everything. When I mentioned in Lesson 5 that the ancient Egyptians and even more ancient civilizations knew about a deeper, basic understanding of the universe, this is the flower of life, and it is also the creation pattern of everything in existence. Even non-tangible things, emotions, thoughts, music in its entire spectrum, everything comes from this image. Okay, so
next we'll take a look at that same cartoon that's going to look at how the flower of life is created. This is important because this will then expound upon other information and videos that we later see. So we'll take a look at how the flower of life is created and its relationship with the creation of the universe.
Information. If you really want to learn more, you must begin to draw it yourself. I kid you not, when you do this, you begin to see things in a new way. You begin to understand why things are done in the way that they are done. Promise. The flower of life was known around the world in ancient times. It was found in Ireland, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, China, Greece, Germany, India, and Iceland. It's also been recorded to have been found in England, Tibet, Japan, Sweden, Lapland, the Yucatan, and I think 14 other places. This thing is everywhere. Not only that, but everywhere around the world it has the same name, the flower of life. Now, to understand the flower of life, first we have to talk about how it's formed. This could get incredibly complex, so I'll try and keep it simple. Imagine consciousness, or spirit, floating in a void, which means it's nothingness, and then spirit. No physical body or mind, just spirit, and that's it. Then blackness, essentially nothing, all around the spirit, for infinite. Spirit decides to do something, so it expands its consciousness all around itself as far as it can go without moving. It creates a sphere around itself. This is the first circle in the flower of life. Then, spirit has an awareness of what's around itself in 360 degrees. It moves to the very edge of the sphere anywhere and repeats what it did the first time. It creates this image, which also creates the Vesica Pisces. Within the Vesica Pisces is a vast and incredible amount of knowledge about width, proportion, depth. Also comes the square roots of 2, 3, and 5, which are all numbers that go on forever. But even more interestingly, comes geometric information about light. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, spirit has no choice but to do it again. Spirit is flawless, and therefore it will move flawlessly, creating the next circle either here or here, exactly one radius away from the other circle next to it. Every time spirit moves another sphere, more and more knowledge comes out of the image that is created. The first complete image to be formed is this. It has two names, the seed of life, or the Genesis pattern, and for good reason. Now, let's look at the book of Genesis for a second. Each of these movements, or creations of circles, can be seen as another day. On the first movement, the second sphere.
Okay, now if you're paying attention, you may note that the creation of the flower of life, one cell divides into 2, then 3, then 4, etc., etc. It mimics cellular division. You were once one cell in your mommy's stomach. You divide it into 2, then 4, then etc., etc. This mimics cellular division. This isn't coincidental. There's a reason why, and there's a reason why they talk about this being the geometry of life and all of creation. So next we'll take a look at the next shape that is created. It's called the egg of life. We'll go back to that cartoon and take a look.
The second image beyond Genesis in the flower of life is the egg of life. This is formed during the second vortex motion. Upon its completion, it creates an image like this, a three-dimensional shape that you can hold in your hand. If you were to connect their centers, you would see a cube. So what? Who cares? Well, the ancient Egyptians did, because they were concerned with creation, life, and death. They called this cluster of spheres the egg of life. You probably won't believe me just yet, but this shape...
So as we've seen, from the egg of life, we can then extract the cube, which is basically part of sacred geometry, one of the sacred geometric shapes. Let's see what happens when we further divide it and get more shapes out of the egg of life and what we can derive from them. Here's that cartoon again.
This image is the fruit of life. This pattern of 13 circles is one of the holiest, most sacred forms in existence. It's called the fruit because it is the result, the fruit, from which the fabric of the details of the reality were created. Remember when we talked about male and female energy, lesson 4? As you can see, this image is female. It has no straight lines. However, when you combine male lines with these female circles, something amazing happens. What you do is draw a straight line from the very center of every single circle to every other circle in this image. When you do this, you get an image which is known throughout the universe, everywhere, as Metatron's cube. It is one of the most important informational systems in the universe, one of the basic creation patterns in existence. So what is Metatron's cube? Well, anyone who has studied sacred geometry, or even regular geometry for that matter, knows that there are 5 unique shapes in the universe, and that they are crucial to understanding both regular and sacred geometry. They are called the Platonic solids. A Platonic solid has certain characteristics by definition. First of all of its faces are the same size. For example, a cube, the most well-known Platonic solid, has a square on every face, so all of its faces are the same size. Secondly, the edges of the Platonic solids are all the same length. All edges of the cube are the same length. Third, it only has one size of interior angles between the faces. In the case of the cube, this angle is 90 degrees. And fourth, when put inside of a sphere, all of the points will touch the edge of the sphere perfectly. With that definition, there are only 4 shapes besides the cube that fit that description. So what are they? Well, we have the dodecahedron, the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the isosahedron, and the hexahedron. All of these shapes are found within Metatron's cube. This knowledge is also where original alchemy came from. The ancient alchemists and great souls like Pythagoras, father of Greece, considered each shape to have an elemental aspect to them. The tetrahedron was...
So now we see why we call it the flower of life. You can make the obvious implication that the flower of life leads to life. The cellular division process is identical with the flower of life process that they show you. Circle, 2 circles, etc., etc. So the flower of life not only leads to life and creation, and you essentially arrived out of the flower of life, but from the flower of life we also derive sacred geometry and the 5 Platonic solids. Now what I'd like to do is just take a look at each one of those solids really quickly show you the shapes and also look at the total sum of all the angles, because that's going to be very important towards putting together all the pieces of the puzzle and the message to humanity from our ancient past. So right now let's take a look at those 5 platonic solids and the other geometric shapes that are going to be important to unlocking this mystery and understanding the ancient message, the message in a bottle that was meant for us to decipher right now. Let's take a look at those solids, those platonic solids, the geometry. First we have the circle or the sphere in its three-dimensional version. The circle or sphere has 360 degrees. Next we have the tetrahedron, which we see the tetrahedron's angles all add up to 720 degrees. Next we have the cube. Note that the angles of the cube add up to 2,160 degrees. Next we have the octahedron. The octahedron's angles all add up to 1,440 degrees. Next is the 12-sided icosahedron. The icosahedron's angles add up to 6,480 degrees. Next we have the 20-sided dodecahedron, which the angles total up to 3,600 degrees. Okay, now you've seen the 5 platonic solids plus the sphere and the resultant angles. Perceptive viewer will notice that these are all sacred numbers. We have 72, the angle of the tetrahedron, or 720 degrees. Doesn't matter the zero. You take away a zero, add several zeros, the number still has its sacred meaning. So 72 is 720 is 7,200, 72,000, etc. It still has the same sacred meaning. It's still a sacred number in that case. So 72 with the tetrahedron. What else do we have? I think we had 1440, 144,000, or 144. These are all biblical numbers. Now, I refer to the Judeo-Christian heritage because I assume that most of my viewers are more familiar with the Bible and how these sacred numbers would be inculcated into the Bible. But it's not just the Bible. In the Rig Veda, the Indians, these numbers, these sacred numbers, 144,000 is very prominent in Indian sacred texts. The Quran from the Muslims, I know it utilizes these sacred numbers as well. Now, we've also mentioned that these sacred numbers are also utilized in sacred architecture, temples, buildings, etc., etc. That's not all. What I'd like to get into now is really the meat of where this begins to strike awe in the viewer, or it should if you're paying attention. We're going to discuss something called the Great Year. The Great Year is essentially a third motion that the Earth takes. It rotates around the sun, it spins, it gives the day and night, and it also has a wobble. The wobble is in a really long period. It takes 25,920 years to go in that long wobble. Now, it should take a long time for us as a civilization to be able to measure that wobble. You would assume that maybe with our high technology we would be able to accomplish it now. The fact is that we've had this knowledge of the Great Year as long as we can. Our history goes back 6,000 years. There was knowledge of the Great Year, and essential what's derived from it is zodiacal ages. You've probably heard of, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. We are entering an age of Aquarius right now. Age of Aquarius is the next house, zodiacal house, we're moving into, and these zodiacal houses last for 2,160 years. That 2,160 years is based off of the 25,920 year great year. The great year is 25,920 years. There are 12 different zodiacal houses within this great year. Each one is 2,160. 2,160 times 12 equals 25,920. Now, I've mentioned 2,160. You may recognize that number. That was some angles of the hexahedron or cube. 2,160 degrees. Wow. We just stumbled upon that? No. You're going to find these sacred numbers over and over and over again. I'm going to move to Randall Carlson. If you don't know him, he's rather well known. I might suggest you look up Joe Rogan, Randall Carlson. Joe Rogan's interviewed him several times. Randall Carlson also has his own website and own YouTube channel. He has an extensive number of lectures that he's done. We're going to go into several key points in some of his lectures and touch on it. Right here, he's going to introduce his audience to the great year and talk about it.
At his astrological time cycles. I don't know how many of you have studied astrology, but in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the precessional cycle, which is 25,920 years, this is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this, or you could think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. You could consider it Earth's third motion, next to its first motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the Sun also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the great year, and it's been measured by...
Okay, so we've seen that the Earth has a wobble. It's Earth's third motion. It's called the Great Year. That wobble takes 25,920 years to complete one wobble. I mentioned already that this 25,920 year Great Year is divided into 12 zodiacal signs. It's where we get the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius that we're now entering. Age of Pisces is what we were in. We're entering into the age of Aquarius right now. At those zodiacal ages are 2,160 years, which is a sacred number that we have already determined came from the cube. The cube is 2,160 degrees. So let's see what Randall Carlson has to say further with regard to the great year and any sacred numbers we may also find within that great year.
920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years, which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron.
So we've determined that the great year, 25,920 years long, can be divided into the zodiacal houses, or months, which are 2,160 years long, which, coincidentally or not, is the sum total of the angles of the hexahedron. 2,160 degrees is the hexahedron's sum of its angles. And we've also determined that the great year can be divided into 4 different seasons: summer, winter, fall, spring. And those seasons are 6,480 years long, which is the equivalent of the icosahedron, which has 6,480 degrees in total angles. Now, could it be that there are actually more sacred numbers hidden in the great year? Let's see what Randall Carlson has to say.
Depending on how good your memory is the number of degrees measuring the cube, 2,160. And then you'll notice the 2 decads of the ecliptic or 20 degrees of the ecliptic is 1,440, the number of degrees in the octahedron. And 1 decan or 10 degrees, for any of you who've studied astrology, you know that the decans are important to astrological determinations. 1 decan of 10 degrees then takes 720 years. And so here we have all 5 of the Platonic solids represent.
So wow, this is pretty incredible. We have the Earth's wobble, 25,920 year long great year. And from that 25,920 year wobble of our Earth, we are able to derive the 5 Platonic sacred numbers in meaningful ways. They relate to the month, whether they relate to the decans, whether they relate to the seasons. This is pretty incredible. It's just that the solar system or the Earth randomly set upon this type of great year and this type of system is somewhat hard to believe. So we have the sacred numbers now in the great year. We have it in our architecture. We have it in our scriptures, whether that's the Indian Rig Veda, the Quran, or the Bible. Well, let's see where else we can find sacred numbers and what we will be able to derive from that.
5,920 seconds, and set each second corresponding to 1 year of the great year. You'll discover it's exactly 432 minutes. 25,920 hours in turn is 1,080 days. And 25,920 days is equal to 72 years in the sacred calendar. Which is interesting because I think most determinations of the average human lifespan right now in history is about 72 years. So you could think of a human lifespan as being equivalent to 1 day of the great year. There's an interesting proportional relationship going on there between the total precessional cycle of 25,920 years and 1 human lifetime.
Okay, so now we've been able to determine that our system of timekeeping has sacred numbers embedded in it too. This is pretty impressive. Now it can be argued, and has been argued by some, that our system of timekeeping is just random. We could have another system of timekeeping that would have different numbers, etc., etc. It's just some random thing. Well, the fact is, our system of timekeeping came from the first known civilization. This is called the Sumerian civilization. It existed 6,000 years ago. It appeared in the area of Iraq, what's called Mesopotamia. 6,000 years ago, all of a sudden, just popped up. All of a sudden, with a high civilization. It had bicameral Congress, they had courts, they had record keeping, they had writing, they had everything that we now associate with high civilization. And it just appeared out of nowhere. Now, historians have questioned how this civilization could just suddenly appear out of nowhere. The Sumerians themselves had an answer to that. They said that their Sumerian civilization was a gift of their gods. They also stated that their system of timekeeping and their system of numbers was also a gift of the gods. So that's where we get into where that timekeeping came from. It appeared to come from some type of civilization higher than the Sumerians, some gods that the Sumerians worship. Now this numerical system is what's called a sexagesimal system. It's based on 60. From whence we get the 360 degrees that we use in a circle. In addition, you may note that our system of timekeeping currently is based on 60. We have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. There are also 12 hours in a day. The 12 is in keeping with the 60-based system. So our system of timekeeping harkens all the way back to that first civilization, which said that they got their system of timekeeping from their gods. So this is very significant because their system of timekeeping is embedded with sacred numbers. So, you know, it appears that this system of sacred numbers as well came from the gods. Let's hear what Randall Carlson has to say about the Sumerian civilization and what they state about their gods and the rule of their gods in the ancient past, long before Sumeria even existed.
Kings, what does pre-diluvian mean? Before the flood, right. So they had this belief that there were 10 kings reigning before the flood. And you'll notice the numbers that they ascribed to each of the kings, the reign, those numbers now should all be becoming familiar to you. You've seen a bunch of them already. There's 43,200, 64,800, 36. You'll notice 64,800 is presented twice, actually 3 times. The total, though, 432,000 years. That's a long span of time. Do you think they meant this literally, or is this strictly symbolic and figurative? Is it possible that the king could have reigned for 36,000 years? I tend to think it was symbolical, but you know, it is interesting that one of the universal traditions from ancient cultures is that before the flood, and all the cultures from all over the world recognized that there was a great flood or even floods that decimated humanity at various times, but they're all pretty much in agreement that prior to the flood, the human lifespan was much longer than it is today, which I find we've all heard about Methuselah living to be 969 years, right? Or Lamech being 777. It seems that they had, in the biblical ages, they seem to have lived about an order of magnitude greater than our modern ages. Which, considering, you know, from my perspective, the things I'd like to get...
All right, so just to recapitulate, we've got the sacred numbers. They're derived essentially from just one circle. That circle divides into 2, divides into a whole bunch, which ultimately becomes the flower of life, which mimics cellular division, more than likely, thus the name of the flower of life. As I stated before, at one point you were a little cell dividing and ultimately became the egg of life, then the fruit of life, and then the flower of life. So that's where it's derived. It appears to be derived from the creation of life, how life is created. But we've also seen sacred numbers in architecture. We spoke about it in scripture. We've seen it embedded in our system of timekeeping. It just showed you where the Sumerians, their history, their king list, again, has sacred numbers all through it. Now we're going to take a look at something that really is going to it's the culmination of where we're heading to, where we find sacred numbers as well. It's pretty astounding. And once again, I'm going to turn to Randall Carlson and let him tell you where we've also found sacred numbers.
Sacred numbers embedded in solar system architecture. I'm only going to show you a few examples of this. In order to convey to you the idea, the solar orb, well, if we measure that, we discover its radius is 432,000 miles, which of course means that its diameter is 864,000 miles. So notice that we measure the sun according to the human measure of miles. And by the way, what is the origin of the mile unit that we use? Anybody know? Origin of the mile? Origin of the mile, it comes from the Latin word mil, which means 1,000. So it's talking about 1,000 something. What would it be talking about? 1,000 what? 1,000 paces that average 5.28 feet in length. It actually goes back, we know that Romans were using a mile that were 1,000 paces, and they would lay out, Rome, for example, had a city center, and everything was measured outwards from that city center according to paces. And those paces were, 1,000 of them gave the Roman mile. The Roman pace was a little bit shorter than the British pace, which is where we get our mile from. Our mile, in fact, interestingly, and I'm going to show you a diagram of this shortly, Stonehenge is 105, the outer ring of the Sarsen stone circle measures right at about 105.6 feet, which makes it 1/5 of a mile, or 1/50th of a mile, I'm sorry. That and several other numbers that we find in megalithic structures in ancient England suggest that the mile was actually a unit of measure that was being used as long ago as 4,000 years or longer. And we're still using it today, the same unit of measure that could have been used 4,000 years ago. And for that reason, you know, and once you begin to get into and understand the sacred basis of our ancient metrological or measuring systems, you'll realize that if we convert completely over to the metric system, we're going to lose something very, very profound. All right, remember what was the length of the Kali Yuga? 432,000 years. What was the length of the Dwapara Yuga? 864,000 years. What was the length of a Platonic month? 1/12 of the great year. Anybody remember? 2,160 years, right? The same number of degrees that measure the cube. All right, what are we looking at here? Anybody recognize that? Look familiar? The moon has a radius of 1,080 miles, which gives it a diameter of 2,160. Remember I said that 1,080 or 108, and it's double, 2,160 was a lunar number. See, this is a clue to you now. There are several references, for example, in the Sumerian tradition describing the ark built by Xisthros, which is being described as a cube that makes no sense. You think, what kind of a ship is it that would be described as a cube? You know, that wouldn't be very seaworthy, a cube, right? But it's not referring to an actual ship as we think of it. It's referring to the cubing of the sphere. And in this case, the sphere that it's referring to is the moon, which was symbolically considered to be an ark to many of the ancient cultures that believed that the earth was periodically destroyed by great catastrophes. So we have the number 1,080, and we have the number 2,160. And then we have the earth. You know, that's the earth. And again, because of the spinning of the earth on its axis, we have this difference between the polar diameter, 7,899, or just thinking round number, 7,900 miles, and the equatorial diameter, 7,926. So that creates a 26-mile difference. And thank you for that 26-mile difference, because life on Earth would be a very chaotic affair without that bulge. We see that the diameter of a sphere with the same surface area as Earth is 7,920 miles. And also the diameter of the Earth, when you take it from, if you slice it through the Tropic of Cancer through to the Tropic of Capricorn, that diameter also is about 7,920. So we use 7,920 as the sacred number to represent the Earth, because even though the Earth varies considerably between equatorial and polar diameters, we find that at a very significant piercing through of the Earth's diameter from one tropic to the other tropic turns out to be 7,920 miles. We also find that if we take a perfect sphere that has the same area, the same surface area as the Earth actually has, its diameter would be 7,920 miles. So that's the number we use for the Earth, which means that its radius is half that, or 3,960. And in most books you read, astronomy and so forth, when they're talking in round numbers about the radius or the diameter of the Earth, these are the numbers they use. 7920.
Wow. So now we have sacred numbers embedded into the architecture of the solar system itself. That's pretty intense, and it makes one wonder how it got there. Next, I'm going to turn to a potential answer. I think it is without a doubt the answer, and I'll expound upon that a little later in this video. But it comes from an article. The article I'm going to show you comes from grahamhancock.com. I'll provide a link below. The article was written by Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. So here's the article on grahamhancock.com. It was written by Christopher Knight and Alan Butler. The article was written in January of 2010, and the article is entitled, "Was Our Solar System Designed to Produce Humans?" The article states, "It's a very strange quirk of fate indeed that the disk of the moon should seem, from an earthly perspective, to be exactly the same size as the sun. Whilst we casually take it for granted that the two main bodies seen in Earth's skies look the same size, it is actually something of a miracle. The odds against this optical illusion happening at all are simply huge. The magic of the moon's movements above our heads goes to even more astonishing levels. By some absolutely incomprehensible quirk of nature, the moon also manages to very precisely imitate the movements of the sun. It imitates the perceived annual movements of the sun each month. But our biggest personal challenge has been to face up to the consequences of our own findings, because they have brought us to the point where we have found compelling evidence that our planet and its environment have been carefully designed for us. Stranger still, there appears to be a message built into the very fabric of the solar system. We were troubled because, despite one of us being an agnostic and the other an atheist, we could not escape the conclusion that we were looking at a message from what we called the UCA, or the Unknown Creative Agency, that had designed our solar system and all life on Earth." So we have the moon, from the perspective of the Earth, appears to be the same size as the sun. When you look up at the sky, the moon and the sun appear to be exactly the same size. Obviously they're not the same size. They appear that way because of their relative distance. But the odds of them appearing from the Earth to be the same size are astronomical. It's an incredible rarity that this would actually happen. When you add in the fact that the moon mimics the movements of the sun every month, the odds of these two factors combined happening naturally are billions and billions to one. It appears that the Earth-Moon-Sun system was arranged. Now, obviously, the next question is, who arranged it that way? A lot of people would immediately say God did it. I'm not denying that as a potential answer. I tend to go more towards a simpler answer, is that there's a super high civilization that had that capacity to do that. There's something called the Kardashev scale, where our thinkers have hypothesized about levels of civilization and how powerful they could potentially get. They put us on a type 0. We're nothing. Type 1 has the capacity to marshal all of the energy of a planet. I think a type 2 has the capacity to marshal all of the energy of a solar system. Type 3 has the capacity to marshal the entire forces of a galaxy. Type 4 can marshal all of the forces and power of the universe. And a Type 5 would actually be able to marshal all the power and energy of multiple universes. So we have all these different levels of potential civilization that our thinkers have thought of, hypothesized. It's my contention that some type of super high civilization that has the capacity to move planets actually arranged our solar system that way. I'd like to take a look at a couple of more videos right now that'll expound upon this. First, I'd like to take a look at our Earth and the tectonic plates and the movements. This next video is going to start about, I believe, 500 million years ago, and it's going to end right about, I think it's about 200 million years ago. You'll see it'll say it on the video. This is allegedly Earth 500 million years ago, and then up to 200 million years ago, essentially what the continents looked like, etc., etc. I stop it at 200 million years ago because that's where Pangaea is. Pangaea was a supercontinent on Earth about 200 million years ago, where Earth had just one continent and the rest of the Earth was water. I just want you to take a look at this video real quick, and then I will go into my own personal analysis on this and how this all fits together with the information that I have shown you earlier in this video. So let's take a look at that real quick. Right at the end of that video, it was just about 200 million years ago, that's right at the boundary of what's called the Permian age and the Triassic age. We have all the land masses coming together solidly for the first time. That continent that was called Pangaea. I have known intuitively for years that there was something special about Pangaea. And I have felt that essentially, in a previous video, I'm going to post a link to it below, we talked about the exploding planet hypothesis, and that the asteroid belt, where the asteroid belt is between Mars and Jupiter, used to be a planet that exploded. I believe that when that planet exploded, a massive piece of that planet still survived, and that planet is Earth. I believe that our planet is a smaller piece of that large planet that existed between Mars and Jupiter, the asteroid belt. And I have felt that Pangaea is evidence of that. Essentially, picture this: that planet smashes apart, it goes shooting off, boom. What eventually become Earth goes shooting off. Now, as its velocity takes it away, what you would have is essentially all the mass congealing on one side, all the liquid congealing on the other side. That's exactly what we see 200 million years ago with Pangaea and then a world ocean. We see all the mass on one side, all the liquid on the other side. Now, in creating this video, I did a little bit of research. I found that video, and I also found more evidence that seems to support my contention. That evidence is that just before Pangaea came to be, that supercontinent, there's something called the Permian extinction. The Permian extinction was the largest extinction our planet has ever seen. Again, it's my contention that large extinction that we had, the largest extinction ever, was actually on the planet between Mars and Jupiter, and that it was the destruction of that planet that caused that extinction. Here's a little bits of information about the Permian extinction. I'm going to share that with you right now from an article. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, colloquially known as the Great Dying, the end Permian extinction or the Great Permian extinction, occurred about 252 million years ago. It is the Earth's most severe known extinction event, with up to 96% of all marine species and 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species becoming extinct. Finally, I'd like to look at a bit of recent news that just fits in really well with everything and gives credence to this entire hypothesis that I have presented in this documentary. Some of you may be familiar with Oumuamua. Oumuamua was an object. It was the first object in recorded human history that we've seen come from outside of the solar system, from deep interstellar space and into our solar system. This object, Oumuamua, had characteristics that scientists have never seen before. I'll let Dr. Abraham Loeb, he's also known as Avi, explain it in an interview that he did with John Michael Gaudier on the radio program Event Horizon. So let's listen in. Dr. Abraham, or Avi Loeb, is the Frank B. Baird Jr. Professor of Science at Harvard University. Dr. Loeb has authored over 700 papers and is the founding director of Harvard's Black Hole Initiative. He serves on the advisory committee for the Breakthrough Starshot Initiative And in 2012, Time magazine selected Dr. Loeb as one of the 25 most influential people in space.
Say in the paper that the Oumuamua occupies a very strange frame of reference, or at least a unique frame of reference within the galaxy. What do you mean by that?
Well, it so happens that the object started at rest relative to the so-called local standard of rest, which is the frame of reference obtained by averaging the motion of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun. So stars are moving relative to each other, and if you take the average of all these motions in the neighborhood of the sun, you get to the local standard of rest. And that's the galactic frame of reference, so to speak. And it so happens that Oumuamua was at rest in that frame. Only 1 in 500 stars are so slow as Oumuamua was before it entered the solar system. And so one way to think of it is that Oumuamua resembled a buoy on the surface of an ocean that sits still on the surface until a boat comes over and kicks it. And so the solar system bumped into Oumuamua just like a boat bumps into a buoy on the surface of an ocean. And the relative speed between Oumuamua and us is simply a result of us moving towards it. This is rather peculiar because if it originated from planetary systems like the solar system, then you would expect it to inherit the motion of the parent star and move at about 20 kilometers per second relative to the local standard of rest. We don't see that. It seems to be associated with this preferred frame of reference. And one possible interpretation is that there is a network of such objects in the galactic frame, and they serve as some posts, road posts, and stars run into them every now and then, like the solar system ran into Oumuamua. Of course, we don't really know, and we have to wait for the second object to be discovered. If the second one is also at that frame of reference, it would make the likelihood of a random event of this type to be 1/500 squared, extremely small probability, almost 1 in a million. And so I would say that we just have to wait, and if there is another one coming at the same speed from the same direction, it would look really peculiar.
It would indeed. Now, what natural process could produce this? Would this, if it is natural that produces frame of reference, would that simply indicate that Oumuamua has just been out circling the galaxy for a very, very long time?
No, because there is no process that can slow down. We refer to the cigar-shaped object. However, I would find the pancake-shaped configuration much more likely, because it's quite likely that this object suffered a lot of kicks along its lengthy journey. And so that's interesting by itself, that based on its tumbling motion, if you assume that it's in the most excited state because of the many kicks that it suffered, then it should be a pancake-like geometry, very extreme shape, without any reference to the possibility that it's a sail. That already sounds very exotic.
Now, this very fast tumbling, this rotation that it exhibits, how does this relate to the local standard of rest, that it seems to be sitting there in one aspect, but it seems to be highly excited in another? How do those two relate?
Well, the motion relative to the local standard of rest is of the object as a whole.
Look, I'd like to summarize everything now. It appears that I'm going to provide links for everything down below so you can do further research on my YouTube videos and the research of others. It appears that 2 planets have exploded in our solar system in the ancient past. I propose that the planet that was between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, that is now the asteroid belt, one remnant of that planet flew off and ultimately became the Earth. Some unknown creative agency, as Knight and Butler term it, rearranged the solar system. Imagine that after 2, even 1 exploded planet, the solar system would be chaotic. believe someone came in and actually rearranged our solar system, and when they did so, they arranged it with sacred numbers that arise out of life itself in the universe. I think they did that to give us a message in a bottle through time. That message in the bottle is encoded into the architecture of the solar system itself. That message not only tells us that civilization has destroyed itself in the past, but that civilization also survives, and that there is some high civilization that came in and rearranged that solar system. And they rearranged that solar system in a very specific way so that at this time, when we have this capacity, we'll be able to decipher the message. 2 planets have exploded in the past. They say 3rd time's a charm. Maybe this is our 3rd chance and maybe our last chance. Let's hope that we can take this message that has been sent, a message in a bottle to us through time, understand it, and change our behavior and the way we relate to life in the universe and everything in a more positive manner, and really push forward as a species collectively to go out into the universe in peace and really get an understanding of who we are, what the universe is about, and our schema in the whole grand scheme of things. Thank you for listening, and make sure click on those links down below, get more information if you're interested. Thank you.